Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I do not wish to break any sacred cows, but if Ernest Hemingway is one of your sacred cows, I am afraid that I am going to have to break it. Actually, I am responding to a video by Matt Wall in which he discusses Ernest Hemingway and comes to the conclusion that Hemingway did not really know what he was doing. I think I'm going to read some stuff to you from some literary criticism. I think that Hemingway was trying to do too much. He was trying to have it both ways. He was trying to be an artist and be something else. I heartily urge you to Matt's video. I will put a link to it in the description box. But now I want to move on, and I'm going to do a lot of reading in this, which has nothing to do with, anything except just that I feel like reading it. So this is Semiotics and Interpretation, a book by Robert Scholes. I do not particularly recommend his other books, but this one on semiotics and interpretation is really marvelous from head to finish. And its purpose is to elucidate, explain the discipline of semiotics, which I'm not sure if semiotics persists, if it went anywhere. It is a form, I guess you would say, of new criticism, or was. But I wish we had a lot more criticism like this. And he particularly takes a story by Hemingway and gives it a thorough deconstructing, if you will. And I'm not going to read the essay in full. I urge you to get this book, this essay, if you want to read more. There's no way to really parse it out to give you a full picture, so you're going to find gaps in what I read. So I will begin. Oh, and I should say the story is called A Very Short Story by Hemingway. And it has a main character whose name is L-U-Z. I am going to pronounce that name loose, but I suppose it might have been pronounced Luz. I don't know. So the first paragraph that I'm going to read, though, is more about semiotics in general, and then he goes into talking about the story a little bit. The semiotician takes the reader's diegetic impulse and establishes it as a principle of structuration. The logic of diegetic structure provides a norm, a benchmark for the study of textual strategies, enabling us to explore the dialogue between text and diegesis. Diegesis. I have trouble with that word. Diegesis. Looking for points of stress where the text changes its ways in order to control the diegetic material for its own ends. I should spell that out just so you can look it up. Diegesis is D-I-E-G-E-S-I-S, and diegetic is D-I-E-G-E-T-I-C. Well, let me take it again, see if I can do any better. That's the fault with reading things silently and having no community with which to discuss them aloud as one might in a good university setting. So, take two. The semiotician takes the reader's diegetic impulse and establishes it as a principle of structuration. The logic of diegetic structure provides a norm, a benchmark for the study of textual strategies, enabling us to explore the dialogue between text and diegesis, looking for points of stress where the text changes its ways in order to control the diegetic material for its own ends. The keys to both affect and intention may be found at these points. Does the text return obsessively to one episode of diegetic history? Does it disturb diegetic order to tell about something important to its own discursive ends? Does it omit something that diegetic inertia deems important? Does it change its viewpoint on diegetic events? Does it conceal things? Does it force evaluations through the rhetoric of its discourse? The calm inertia of diegetic process, moved by the weight of culture and tradition and the needs of memory itself, offers a stable background for the mapping of textual strategies. And our most aesthetically ambitious texts will be those that find it most necessary to put their own stamp on the diegetic process. Hemingway's A Very Short Story presents itself as exceptionally reticent. The familiar Hemingway style, which Gerard Genette has called behaviorist, seems to efface itself to offer us a pure diegesis. Boy meets girl, a cute meet, as they used to say in Hollywood. They fall in love, become lovers, plan to marry, but the vicissitudes of war separate them, and finally, forces that are too strong for them bring about their defeat. This is the story, is it not? A quasi-naturalistic slice of life that begins almost like a fairy tale. Once upon a time in another country, and ends with the negation of the fairy tale formula. And they lived unhappily ever after. A negation that proclaims the text's realistic or naturalistic status. But there is already a tension here between the open form of the slice of life and the neat closure of the fairy tale, which emerges most clearly if we compare the progress of diegetic time with the movement of the text. We can do this in a crude way by mapping the hours, days, and weeks of diegetic time against the paragraphs of the text. The slowest paragraphs are the first, one night, and the third, one trip to the Duomo. The fastest are the fourth, his time at the front, the sixth, Luce's time in Pordenone, and the seventh, or last, which carries Luce to the point of infinity with the word never. The narrative thus increases its speed throughout and achieves its effect of culmination by the use of the infinite terms in the last paragraph. The text might easily have contented itself with recounting the fact that the major did not marry Luce in the spring, but it feels obliged to add, or any other time, just as it is obliged to use the word never in the next sentence. Something punitive is going on here, as the discourse seems to be revenging itself upon the character. Why? Before trying to answer that question, we would do well to consider some other features of the text-diegesis relationship. From the first paragraph on, it is noticeable that one of the two main characters in the diegesis has a name in the text while the other is always referred to by a pronoun. Why should this be? The answer emerges when we correlate this detail with other features of the text-diegesis relationship. The text, as we have observed, is reticent, as if it, too, does not want to blab about almost anything during the silky, talky time. But it is more reticent about some things than others. In the first paragraph, the male character is introduced in the first sentence. Luce appears in the fifth. When she sits on the bed, we are told, she was cool and fresh in the hot night. Why this information about her temperature? She is the nurse, after all, and he the patient. In fact, it is not information about how she feels at all, but about how she appears to him. The text is completely reticent about how he feels himself, though the implication is that he finds her coolness attractive. How he seems to her, or how she feels about him, are not considered relevant. This is a selective reticence. Our vision is subjectively with him, as the personal pronoun implies, while Luce is seen more objectively, as the proper name implies. The final implication of paragraph 1 is that they make love right then and there. But the reticent text makes the reader responsible for closing that little gap in the diegesis. This matter of the point of view taken by the text can be established more clearly with the use of a sort of litmus test developed by Roland Barthes. If we rewrite the text, substituting the first person pronoun for the third, we can tell whether or not we are dealing with what Barthes calls a personal system, a covert first person narrative. See Introduction to the Structural Analysis of Narratives in Image Music Text, page 112. In the case of a very short story, where we have two third-person characters of apparently equal consequence, we must rewrite the story twice to find out what we need to know. Actually, the issue is settled conclusively after the first two paragraphs, which are all I will present here. The first two paragraphs of a very short story, rewritten. He transposed to I. One hot evening in Padua, they carried me onto the roof, and I could look out over the top of the town. There were chimney swifts in the sky. After a while, it got dark and the searchlights came out. The others went down and took the bottle with them. Luce and I could hear them below on the balcony. Luce sat on the bed. She was cool and fresh in the hot night. Luce stayed on duty for 3 months. They were glad to let her. When they operated on me, she prepared me for the operating table, and we had a joke about friend or enema. I went under the anesthetic, holding tight onto myself so I would not blab about anything during the silly, talky time. After I got on crutches, I used to take the temperatures so Luce would not have to get up from the bed. There were only a few patients, and they all knew about it. They all liked Luce. As I walked back along the halls, I thought of Luce in my bed. The same paragraphs, Luce transposed to I. One hot evening in Padua, they carried him onto the roof, and he could look out over the top of the town. There were chimney swifts in the sky. After a while, it got dark, and the searchlights came out. The others went down and took the bottles with them. He and I could hear them below on the balcony. I sat on the bed. I was cool and fresh in the hot night. I stayed on night duty for 3 months. They were glad to let me. When they operated on him, I prepared him for the operating table, and we had a joke about friend or enema. He went under the anesthetic, holding tight onto himself so he would not blab about anything during the silly, talky time. After he got on crutches, he used to take the temperatures so I would not have to get up from the bed. There were only a few patients, and they all knew about it. They all liked me. As he walked back along the halls, he thought of me in his bed. He transposes to I perfectly, but Luce does not. In the second rewriting, the first person itself enters the discourse with a shocking abruptness, since the earlier sentences seem to have been from the male patient's point of view. The stress becomes greater in the last sentence of the first paragraph, which has been constructed to indicate how she appeared to him, not how she seemed to herself. But the last two sentences of the second paragraph in the second rewriting are even more ludicrous, with the first-person narrator informing us of how well-liked she was and finally describing his thoughts about her. In this rewriting, there is simply too great a tension between the angle of vision and the person of the voice. The discourse loses its coherence. But the first rewriting is completely coherent because in it, voice and vision coincide. It is really his narrative all the way. The third-person narration of the original text is a disguise, a mask of pseudo-objectivity worn by the text for its own rhetorical purposes. The discourse of this text, as I have suggested, is marked by its reticence, but this reticence of the text is contrasted with a certain amount of talkativeness in the diegesis. He, of course, doesn't want to blab, but they want everyone to know about their relationship. Implication, she is the one who wants the news spread. There is absolutely no direct discourse in the text, but there are two paragraphs devoted to letters and one to recounting a quarrel. Here, too, we find reticence juxtaposed to talkativeness. Luce writes many letters to him while he is at the front, but the text does not say whether he wrote any to her. Hers are clearly repetitive and hyperbolic. The style of the discourse becomes unusually paratactic, even for Hemingway, whenever her letters are presented. They were all about the hospital and how much she loved him and how it was impossible to get along without him and how terrible it was missing him at night. My italics. The repetitive hows, the hyperbolic impossible and terrible, and all the ands suggest an unfortunate prose style even without direct quotation. Above all, they indicate an ominous lack of reticence. So then Scholes goes on and mines Hemingway's letters, mines the historical documentation such as we have. And it is very interesting. Technically and by rights, one should be able to approach a text without any personal information pertaining to the author. In a case like this, however, where the text is faulty and there is a problem to the text upon which one cannot put one's finger exactly, then it is a perfectly reasonable method of the literary critic to do that further delving if he can and try to understand it. The student interpreting a very short story as a work is put into an interesting position. Like many of Hemingway's early stories, This one presents a male character favorably and a female unfavorably. In fact, it strongly implies favorable things about masculinity and unfavorable things about femininity. It does this, as our semiotic analysis has shown, by mapping certain traits onto a value structure. The good, loyal, reticent male character is supported by the discourse through its covert first-person perspective and the complicity of its style with those values. The bad, treacherous, talkative female is cast out. Even the carefully established point of view is violated in the last paragraph so that the narrator can track loose through eternity and assure us that she never married her major in the spring or any other time. But for the most part, Hemingway's control over his text is so great that the anger at the root of the story is transformed into what we may take as the cool, lapidary prose of the pure, impersonal artist. And there definitely is an anger behind this story, to which we shall soon turn our attention. And of course, as I say, you must read this essay to get that. It may be available online somewhere. It delves into Hemingway's biography and what he is trying to do. It reveals what is known about the relationship upon which this short story is based, and believe me, a sufficient amount is known. Just one final paragraph from towards the end. The text produced by Hemingway responds to a double motivation. It wants to be art, to be a work that is complete in itself, but it also wants to rewrite life, to make its surrogate protagonist more triumphant as a lover, more active as a soldier, and more deeply victimized as a man than was the author himself. So, again, I invite you to sally over to Matt Wall's channel and to the video I mentioned. He puts his finger on the flaws in the writing of Ernest Hemingway without the benefit of semiotic analysis. He is just a perceptive reader and a practitioner of the art of writing himself, and he has a keen eye and sensibility. So I, again, encourage you to look at Matt's video about Ernest Hemingway, and if I have not succeeded in breaking any of your sacred cows, his video may well do so. Thank you for stopping by my channel.